My name is Madison Thompson, and I'm about to tell you a story that changed everything. It started with a fancy family dinner invitation, but what happened next? Well, let me just say that sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who see you the least. Picture this. I'm 28 years old, sitting in my apartment after a 14-hour shift when my phone buzzes. It's my mother, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she reserves for family obligations. Madison, honey, we're having a celebration dinner for David's promotion to regional manager, Saturday night at Le Bernardin. The whole family will be there. Le Bernardin. The kind of place where appetizers cost more than most people's grocery budget. I should have known something was up. But let me take you back to where this all really began. See, in the Thompson family hierarchy, I've always been the odd one out. My older brother, Brian, 35, married with 2 kids. He's the responsible one. My sister Sarah, 33, married to a lawyer with a house in the suburbs. She's the successful one. My brother David, 31, just got promoted to regional manager at his insurance company. He's the ambitious one. And then there's me, Madison, the confused one, the lost one, the one who, according to family legend, just hasn't figured life out yet. This perception started early. I remember being 8 years old, sitting at our kitchen table doing homework while my siblings got to help Dad with important projects around the house. When I asked if I could help too, Dad would ruffle my hair and say, "Maybe when you're older, kiddo, this is big kid stuff." The message was clear. I wasn't ready. I wasn't enough. I wasn't worthy. The pattern continued through high school. When Brian got his driver's license, there was a family celebration. When Sarah got accepted to college, Mom cried happy tears. When David landed his first job, Dad took him out for a man-to-man dinner. When I graduated valedictorian, "That's nice, honey. Can you help clean up after dinner?" But the moment that really crystallized everything happened when I was 16. It was Brian's college graduation, and the whole extended family was there. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, everyone gathered for photos on the campus lawn. I was standing with the group when my mother suddenly grabbed my arm. "Madison, honey, could you step back a bit? You're blocking Grandma in the photo." I stepped back. Then she looked at me again, that critical look I'd grown so familiar with. "Actually, maybe you could just stand over there. This is really Brian's moment." I watched from 15 feet away as my family posed for what felt like 100 photos, laughing, hugging, celebrating, and there I was, close enough to be nearby but far enough away to be invisible. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just the youngest. I wasn't just the confused one. I was the expendable one. The years that followed only reinforced this dynamic. When Brian and his wife needed help with their mortgage, Mom and Dad were there with a check. When Sarah wanted to throw an elaborate wedding, the family rallied with emotional and financial support. When David needed career advice, Dad spent hours on the phone with his business contacts. But when I needed help with college applications, "You're smart, Madison. You'll figure it out." The unspoken rule in our family was simple. The married siblings were adults who deserved respect and support. Madison was still just Madison, floating somewhere in limbo between childhood and real life. Even at family gatherings, the seating arrangement told the story. Brian and his wife at the head table with Mom and Dad. Sarah and her husband in the seats of honor. David, even though he was single then, always got a spot with the grown-ups. And me? Well, there was usually a spot somewhere. Sometimes with the teenagers, sometimes by myself, sometimes I just stood. The worst part wasn't even the exclusion. It was the way they talked about me in front of me like I wasn't there. "Madison's still trying to find herself," Mom would say to relatives. "She's always been a late bloomer," Dad would add with a dismissive chuckle. "Don't worry about Madison," Sarah would chime in. "She'll figure it out eventually." Eventually. Always eventually. As if my entire existence was just a waiting period before I became a real person worthy of their attention. By the time I turned 25, I'd started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I really was just someone who couldn't get their life together. Maybe I deserved to be treated like a permanent child who needed to prove herself before earning a seat at the adult table. That doubt ate at me for months. I'd lie awake at night wondering what was wrong with me. Why couldn't I be like Brian, settled and secure? Why couldn't I be like Sarah, following the traditional path? Why couldn't I be like David, climbing the corporate ladder? The answer came to me during one particularly brutal family dinner when I was 26. We were at a restaurant celebrating Sarah's pregnancy announcement, and the conversation inevitably turned to everyone's life updates. "Brian's thinking about buying a bigger house," Mom announced proudly. "Sarah's going to be such a wonderful mother," Dad beamed. "David's company is considering him for another promotion," Mom added. Then all eyes turned to me. The expectant silence stretched until finally Dad cleared his throat. "And Madison, well, Madison's still working at that hospital, right? Still working at that hospital." Like it was some kind of failure. Like the 60-hour weeks, the life and death decisions, the years of medical training were just a phase I was going through. That night, I made a decision. If my family was going to treat me like I was lost, then maybe it was time to get found. But I wasn't going to do it for them. I was going to do it for me. The problem was, I'd spent so many years believing their narrative about me that I'd forgotten who I actually was. I'd let their doubt become my doubt. I'd let their limited vision of my potential become my own ceiling. So I decided to leave. Not dramatically, not with some big announcement. I just stepped away. I moved across the country to start fresh, to remember who Madison Thompson really was when she wasn't being defined by her family's expectations. The first year was harder than I'd expected, not because I missed them, though I did sometimes, but because I had to relearn how to trust my own judgment. For so long, I'd been conditioned to seek their approval that making decisions purely for myself felt foreign. I was working as a nurse in a cardiac unit in Seattle, putting myself through night school to complete my pre-med requirements. The work was exhausting, but for the first time in my life, I felt seen. My supervisors noticed my dedication. My patients trusted my care. My professors recognized my potential. It was Dr. Williams, the head of cardiology, who first suggested I consider medical school. "You have instincts that can't be taught," he told me after I'd helped save a patient during a particularly complex emergency. "Have you ever thought about becoming a doctor?" The question hit me like lightning. Had I ever thought about it? I dreamed about it since I was a kid, but somewhere along the way, I'd let those dreams get buried under my family's low expectations. "I don't know if I'm smart enough," I heard myself say, and immediately felt disgusted. There it was, their voice coming out of my mouth. Dr. Williams looked at me seriously. "Madison, in the 2 years you've worked here, you've anticipated complications before seasoned doctors caught them. You've comforted families through their worst moments with a grace I've rarely seen. And you've never, not once, let personal exhaustion compromise patient care. The question isn't whether you're smart enough. The question is whether you're brave enough to stop underestimating yourself." That conversation changed everything. Within 6 months, I was enrolled in medical school. The next 4 years were a blur of studying, clinical rotations, and slowly, gradually, remembering what it felt like to be good at something, to be recognized for my abilities rather than dismissed for my supposed shortcomings. Meanwhile, my family continued their pattern. They'd call occasionally, usually when they needed something or wanted to share news about the successful siblings. The conversations always followed the same script. What are you doing again?" Mom would ask. "Medical school," I'd remind her. "Oh, right, that's nice. Well, let me tell you about David's new promotion." They weren't malicious exactly. They just couldn't see me. After so many years of writing me off as the family disappointment, they literally couldn't adjust their perception. I was stuck in their minds as the confused little sister who needed guidance, not the woman who was excelling in one of the most demanding fields in the world. During my 3rd year of medical school, I discovered my true calling, cardiac surgery. There was something about the precision, the high stakes, the immediate life and death impact that spoke to me. My professors noticed too. "You have surgeon's hands," Dr. Martinez told me during my cardiothoracic rotation, "and more importantly, you have a surgeon's mind. Have you considered specializing?" I had, but I'd been afraid to voice it. Cardiac surgery was notoriously competitive, demanding, male-dominated. It required a level of confidence that I was still rebuilding after years of family conditioning. But as I stood in that OR, holding a human heart in my hands, feeling its rhythm, knowing that my next move could mean the difference between someone going home to their family or never seeing them again, I knew this was what I was meant to do. The match process for surgical residency was grueling. I applied to the top programs in the country, knowing the competition would be fierce. When I got the call that I'd matched at Johns Hopkins, one of the most prestigious cardiac surgery programs in the world, I sat in my apartment and cried. Not because I was surprised, exactly. By then I knew I was good at this. But because, for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly proud of myself. Not seeking approval, not trying to prove anything to anyone, just proud. I called my family to share the news, expecting, well, I'm not sure what I was expecting. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said in the same tone she'd used to congratulate someone on a nice haircut. "Johns Hopkins is in Baltimore, right? That's so far away." "It's one of the best programs in the country," I explained. "This is a really big deal." "I'm sure it is, sweetheart. Oh, did I tell you that David might be getting another promotion?" The conversation lasted 15 minutes, with about 30 seconds dedicated to my acceptance and 14 and a half minutes covering David's potential career advancement. When I hung up, I wasn't hurt anymore. I was free. Because I finally understood that their inability to see my worth wasn't a reflection of my value. It was a limitation of their vision, and I didn't need their validation to know who I was becoming. Residency was 5 years of 100-hour weeks, life and death decisions, and gradually becoming the surgeon I'd always had the potential to be. I specialized in complex cardiac procedures, developed new techniques, published research papers, and slowly built a reputation in the medical community. During my chief resident year, I performed a groundbreaking surgery on a 7-year-old girl with a rare congenital heart defect. The procedure took 14 hours, required innovative approaches, and ultimately saved her life. The case was written up in medical journals, and I was invited to present at conferences. The day the article was published, I got exactly one text from my family. It was from Brian. "Saw something online about you. Cool." Meanwhile, when David got promoted to assistant regional manager, a lateral move with a fancy title, the family group chat exploded with congratulations for 3 days straight. That's when I stopped trying, not in my career, but in seeking their recognition. I realized that I could cure cancer, win a Nobel Prize, and perform surgery on the president, and they'd still see me as little Madison who hadn't figured life out yet. So I focused on building a life that fulfilled me. I bought a beautiful apartment overlooking the harbor. I developed friendships with colleagues who respected my expertise. I dated people who saw my ambition as attractive rather than threatening. I created a world where I was valued for who I actually was, not dismissed for who they thought I should be. By the time I turned 28, I was the youngest department head in the history of Johns Hopkins cardiac surgery. I had performed over 500 successful operations. I had published 43 peer-reviewed papers. I had saved more lives than I could count. And my family still introduced me as Madison, the one who's still figuring things out. Which brings us back to that phone call about David's celebration dinner. As I sat there listening to my mother's voice, explaining how the whole family would be there to honor David's promotion to regional manager, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not hurt, just curiosity. Because I realized I had a choice. I could skip the dinner, as I had most family events for the past 3 years. I could make an excuse about work, which was always true anyway. I could continue living my successful, fulfilling life while maintaining the safe distance I'd created. Or I could go, not to seek their approval or prove anything to them, but just to see what would happen when the Madison they thought they knew showed up in a room where she was finally, truly, herself. "I'll be there," I told my mother. "Oh, wonderful. It'll be so nice to have the whole family together. Madison, this might be a good opportunity for you to network. David knows lots of successful people now." I smiled to myself. "I'm sure he does, Mom. I'm sure he does." As I hung up the phone, I looked around my apartment. medical journals stacked on the coffee table, awards and certificates on the walls, a surgery schedule that would make most people dizzy, a life built on my own terms, by my own hands, with my own vision. They had no idea who I'd become, and honestly, I was curious to see their faces when they found out. What I didn't know was that in 3 days at Le Bernardin, their limited perception of me was about to collide with reality in a way that would change everything. Not for me, I already knew who I was, but for them? Well, let's just say that sometimes the people who see you least clearly are the ones most shocked when the truth finally comes to light. Saturday evening arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of my closet, choosing between my usual family dinner attire, something modest and unremarkable that wouldn't draw attention, and the elegant black dress I'd bought for medical conferences. Tonight felt different somehow, so I chose the dress, not to impress them, but because I was tired of dimming myself to make others comfortable. The Uber ride to Le Bernardin gave me time to think. I'd spent the last 3 days second-guessing my decision to attend. My last family gathering had been Sarah's baby shower 8 months ago, where I'd spent the entire afternoon listening to relatives ask when I was going to settle down and start a real family. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days literally restarting hearts, but according to them, I hadn't started living. As the car pulled up to the restaurant, I saw them through the window. The whole clan was already assembled. Brian and his wife Jennifer, Sarah and her husband Mark, David looking pleased with himself in a new suit, and my parents surveying their kingdom. They looked like a magazine spread of the perfect American family. Successful, polished, complete, and then there was the empty chair. Mine. Always mine. The afterthought seat that got filled in when everyone else was accounted for. I walked into Le Bernardin and immediately felt the difference. This wasn't our usual family restaurant. This was serious money, serious power. The kind of place where senators dined and Fortune 500 CEOs made deals. As I approached the hostess, I noticed something that made me pause. "Dr. Thompson!" The restaurant manager, a distinguished man in his 50s, approached with a genuine smile. "What a pleasure to see you again. Will you be dining with us tonight?" For a moment, I was confused. Then I remembered Mr. Harrison's daughter. 3 months ago, I'd performed emergency surgery on a 16-year-old girl who'd collapsed during a tennis match. Massive congenital heart defect that no one had detected. Her father had been beside himself with worry, and I'd spent hours explaining the procedure, the risks, the recovery process. "Actually, yes," I replied. "I'm here with my family, the Thompson party." His face lit up. "Of course. Right this way. And Dr. Thompson, I can't thank you enough again for what you did for my daughter. She's back on the tennis team now, thanks to you." As he led me toward the private dining room, I caught sight of another familiar face. Dr. Harrison himself, seated at a corner table with what looked like hospital board members. He raised his hand in a subtle wave, and I nodded back politely. Dr. Harrison was the chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins, my direct supervisor, and one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country. He was also the kind of man who didn't eat at restaurants like this unless he was discussing multi-million-dollar hospital expansions or consulting with pharmaceutical executives. "Madison." My mother's voice cut through my observations as I entered the private dining room. "There you are, sweetie. We were starting to wonder if you'd gotten lost." The familiar sting of the casual insult, the implication that I was irresponsible, unreliable, somehow incapable of basic navigation, washed over me. But tonight, it felt different. Smaller, like criticism from someone whose opinion had lost its power over me. "Sorry, I'm late," I said, kissing my mother's cheek. "Long day at the hospital." "Still working those crazy hours," Dad said with a shake of his head. "When are you going to find a job with better work-life balance?" I bit back the response that my job had saved 17 lives this week alone. Instead, I smiled and took in the room. It was beautiful, elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The table was set for 8, with David positioned at the head like a guest of honor. "Madison, come sit down," Sarah called out. "We saved you a spot." I looked where she was pointing, and felt my heart sink. At the far end of the table, there was a smaller, separate table set for two. It looked like a children's table. "That's the kids' table," Jennifer said helpfully, as if I hadn't already figured it out. "We thought you'd be more comfortable there." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I was 28 years old. I had more education than anyone else in this room. I made more money than most of them combined. I held people's lives in my hands on a daily basis, and they wanted me to sit at the kids' table. "The kids' table," I repeated, my voice carefully neutral. "Well, Mom said with that tone she used when she was about to say something particularly condescending, the adults' table is really for people who have, adult responsibilities, mortgages, spouses, children, real grown-up concerns." David leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. "Nothing personal, Madison. It's just that we're going to be talking about serious stuff tonight. Career advancement, investment strategies, family planning. Things that matter to people who've really established themselves." The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they hurt. I was long past being wounded by their limited perception, but because of the sheer audacity, the casual cruelty wrapped up in familial authority. I looked around the table, Brian nodding along like David had said something profound, Sarah arranging her napkin with the satisfied air of someone who knew her place in the hierarchy, my parents beaming with pride at their successful children who'd earned their seats at the grown-up table. And then I looked at that small table in the corner. 2 chairs. One for me, and one for who? Some future cousin? A placeholder for the child I apparently still was in their eyes? "Madison, honey," Mom continued, "don't look so upset. It's not punishment. It's just appropriate. When you've achieved the kind of stability that David has, when you've built the kind of life that really matters, then of course you'll join us at the main table." That's when something crystallized inside me. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. Perfect diamond-sharp clarity about who these people were and what they thought of me. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse with deliberate calm. "You know what? You're absolutely right." They looked confused. This wasn't the reaction they'd expected. "I should be sitting where I belong," I continued, my voice steady, "with people who actually see me for who I am." "Madison, don't be dramatic," Dad said with an eye roll. "It's just a seating arrangement." "You're right again," I replied. "It is just a seating arrangement, and this particular arrangement tells me exactly where I stand with all of you." I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear confused murmurs. "Where are you going?" Sarah called out. I paused at the doorway and looked back at them. 7 people who shared my blood but had never bothered to know my heart. 7 people who'd spent my entire adult life treating me like a permanent child, waiting for permission to be taken seriously. "I'm going to dinner," I said simply, "with adults." And I walked out. The main dining room of Le Bernardin was quieter, more elegant than the private room had been. I approached the hostess station, my mind racing. I could go home. I could call an Uber and spend the evening with a medical journal and a glass of wine. I could pretend this night had never happened. But as I stood there, Dr. Harrison appeared at my elbow. "Dr. Thompson, is everything all right?" I turned to face him, this man who knew me professionally, who'd seen me perform under pressure, who'd trusted me with the most complex cases in our department. "Actually, Doctor Harrison, would it be terribly inappropriate if I asked to join you and your colleagues for dinner? I seem to have found myself unexpectedly free this evening." His eyebrows raised slightly. "Of course, we'd be honored, but wasn't that your family in the private room?" "It was," I said, and left it at that. As Dr. Harrison led me to his table, he made introductions. "Dr. Thompson, I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Wells from the American Heart Association, Mr. James Morrison from Morrison Medical Technologies, and Dr. Sarah Chen from the NIH. "Dr. Thompson," Dr. Wells said warmly, "I've read your papers on minimally invasive valve replacement. Groundbreaking work." "The Morrison technique for pediatric cardiac repair," Mr. Morrison added. That was your innovation, wasn't it? We've been following the success rates. Remarkable. I felt something I hadn't felt in that other room, recognition. These people knew my work. They understood my contributions. They saw me as a colleague, an equal, a professional worth their respect. "Thank you," I said, settling into the chair Dr. Harrison had pulled out for me. "It's always gratifying when research translates into better patient outcomes." We'd been talking for perhaps 20 minutes when I noticed movement near the entrance to the private dining room. My family was emerging, looking confused and somewhat agitated. They seemed to be having some kind of disagreement in hushed tones. Then David spotted me across the restaurant. I watched his face go through several expressions: confusion, annoyance, and then something that might have been concern. He started walking toward our table, and the rest of the family followed. "Madison," he said as he approached, his voice carrying that particular tone older siblings use when they think younger siblings are misbehaving. "What are you doing? We're waiting for you." Before I could respond, Dr. Harrison stood up. "Excuse me, but you are." "I'm David Thompson, Madison's brother. I'm sorry if she's bothering you, but she's supposed to be having dinner with our family." The words hung in the air. Bothering you. As if my presence at a table with respected medical professionals was some kind of social intrusion that needed to be apologized for. Dr. Harrison's expression shifted slightly. "Dr. Thompson isn't bothering anyone. She's a valued colleague and one of the finest cardiac surgeons I've had the privilege to work with." David laughed. Actually laughed. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Madison isn't a doctor. She works at a hospital, but she's more like a nurse or something." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Wells' eyebrows shot up. Mr. Morrison looked bewildered. Dr. Chen actually turned in her chair to stare at David with unconcealed amazement. "I'm sorry," Dr. Wiki Harrison said slowly, "but are you telling me that you don't know what your sister does for a living?" By now, my parents had reached the table, with Brian and Sarah close behind. Mom immediately went into damage control mode. "We're so sorry to interrupt your dinner," she said to Dr. Harrison with an embarrassed smile. "Madison sometimes, she has a tendency to insert herself into situations where she doesn't quite belong. We'll just take her back to our table now." "Insert herself?" Dr. Harrison repeated, his voice carrying a note of incredulity that I'd never heard before. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Dr. Thompson belongs wherever she chooses to be. She's the youngest department head in the history of our institution, one of the most skilled cardiac surgeons in the country, and someone whose expertise is sought after by medical centers worldwide." The words landed like bombs in the small space around our table. I watched my family's faces cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition. "Department head?" Brian said weakly. "Cardiac surgeon?" Sarah whispered. Dr. Wells leaned forward. "Dr. Thompson, these are your family members?" I nodded, feeling oddly detached from the moment, like I was watching it happen to someone else. "How wonderful," she continued. "You must be so proud. Dr. Thompson published a study just last month that's going to revolutionize how we approach complex congenital repairs. She's saved more children's lives in the past 2 years than most surgeons save in a decade." Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Madison, is this true?" Before I could answer, the restaurant manager who'd greeted me earlier appeared with a bottle of champagne. "Compliments of the house, Dr. Thompson," he said warmly. "When I told the chef you were dining with us tonight, he insisted. We'll never forget what you did for our family." Mom's mouth was actually hanging open. What did she do?" "She saved my daughter's life," the manager said simply. "Emergency surgery. The other doctor said it couldn't be done, but Dr. Thompson found a way. Our little girl is alive because of her." I could see the pieces clicking into place in their minds. The late nights I'd blamed on work, the conferences I'd mentioned attending, the apartment I could somehow afford, the life I'd built that they'd never bothered to ask about. "Madison," David said, and his voice was different now, smaller. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question was so absurd that I almost laughed. Tell you what, David, that I was in medical school. I did. That I was doing my residency. I mentioned it. That I was specializing in cardiac surgery. It came up. That I was building a career, making a difference, saving lives. I tried. But we thought... Mom started, then stopped. You thought what? I asked, my voice still calm. That I was still the confused little girl who couldn't figure out her life? That I was still waiting for your permission to be successful? That I was still hoping for an invitation to the adults' table? Dr. Harrison was watching this exchange with fascination. Dr. Thompson, how long has it been since you've discussed your career with your family? I've tried, I said honestly, but it's hard to have a conversation when people aren't listening. Sarah was shaking her head slowly. But Madison, we had no idea. I mean, you never said you were this successful. Successful? I repeated. Sarah, I told you last Christmas that I'd been promoted to department head. You said, that's nice, and then spent an hour talking about your new kitchen renovation. The memory seemed to hit her like a physical blow. I could see her trying to recall the conversation, probably realizing for the first time that she'd dismissed news of a major career milestone without a second thought. Brian was running his hands through his hair. Jesus, Madison, we really screwed this up, didn't we? Mr. Morrison cleared his throat gently. Perhaps we should give you some privacy for this family discussion. Actually, I said, standing up, I think I should go. It's been a long day, and I have surgery in the morning. Surgery? Dad repeated like the word was foreign. Yes, Dad, surgery. It's what cardiac surgeons do. I turned to Dr. Harrison and his colleagues. Thank you for the lovely dinner conversation. Dr. Wells, I'll send you those papers we discussed. Mr. Morrison, I look forward to hearing about the new valve technology. As I gathered my purse, David stepped forward. Madison, wait. We need to talk about this. We need to fix this. I looked at him. This brother who'd just been celebrating his promotion to regional manager while dismissing my achievements as a world-class surgeon. Fix what, David? This misunderstanding, this whole thing. It's not a misunderstanding, I said gently. This is exactly what you all think of me. Tonight just made it visible. Mom was starting to cry. Madison, honey, we're your family. We love you. We didn't realize... You didn't realize because you never asked, I said. You never asked about my work beyond still at the hospital. You never asked about my achievements beyond that's nice. You never asked about my life beyond when I was going to get married and have kids. But we're asking now, Sarah said desperately. We want to know now. I smiled sadly. Now you want to know because other people told you I was worth knowing. But for the past 5 years, I've been trying to tell you myself, and you couldn't hear me. I walked toward the exit, and they followed. Outside on the sidewalk, the cool evening air felt refreshing after the intensity of the restaurant. Madison, please, Mom was saying. Don't leave like this. Come back inside. We can start over. We can... Mom, I said, turning to face all of them. Do you remember what you said to me in there? About the adults' table being for people with real responsibilities, people who matter. She winced. I didn't mean. You meant exactly that. And you know what? You were right. I should be sitting with people who see my worth, people who respect my contributions, people who know who I am. We want to know who you are, Brian said. No, I replied. You want to know who I've become now that other people have validated my success. But I'm the same person I was when I walked into that room tonight. I'm the same person I've been for years while you've been treating me like I was still figuring out my life. A cab pulled up and I opened the door. Madison, don't do this, David pleaded. We're family. I paused with one foot in the cab. Family doesn't put people at kids' tables, David. Family doesn't dismiss achievements. Family doesn't require outside validation to show respect. So what does this mean? Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. Are you cutting us off? Are you never speaking to us again? I considered the question seriously. I don't know, I said honestly. I know that I'm tired of being treated like I'm not enough. I'm tired of having my worth questioned by people who should be proud of me. I'm tired of being the family disappointment when I'm actually the family success story you never bothered to read. We're proud of you now, Mom said desperately. Now, I repeated. You're proud of me now that strangers have told you I'm worthy of pride. But where was that pride when I graduated medical school? Where was it when I got into residency? Where was it when I became the youngest department head in hospital history? The questions hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the answer. They hadn't been there because they hadn't been paying attention. I need time, I said finally. I need to think about what kind of relationship I want with people who fundamentally don't see me. Madison, Dad started. Dad, tonight you were embarrassed that I was bothering your important colleagues. When it turned out I was more accomplished than any of you had imagined, suddenly you wanted to claim me. That's not love, that's ownership. I got into the cab and rolled down the window. I'll consider rebuilding a relationship with you when you can show me that you respect me for who I am, not for who other people tell you I am. When you can value my achievements without external validation. When you can treat me like the adult I've been for a very long time. As the cab pulled away, I looked back to see them standing on the sidewalk. They looked lost, confused, like people who'd just discovered that someone they thought they knew completely was actually a stranger. Because that's exactly what had happened. For years, I'd been living two lives. The real one, where I was Dr. Madison Thompson, successful surgeon, respected colleague, someone who mattered. And the family one, where I was just Madison, the confused little sister who hadn't figured things out yet. Tonight, those two lives had collided. And for the first time, my family had seen the real me. The question now was whether they could learn to love the person I actually was, or if they'd only ever been capable of loving the person they thought I should be. As the city lights blurred past the cab window, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete honesty. I'd spent so long trying to earn their respect while hiding my success that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be fully myself. Tomorrow I had a surgery scheduled, a 7-year-old boy with a complex congenital defect. His parents would look at me with trust, faith, hope. They would see me as someone capable of miracles. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than enough. My phone buzzed with text messages, apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness. But I turned it off and watched the city pass by feeling lighter than I had in years. Because for the first time in my adult life, I'd chosen myself. I'd chosen my worth over their approval. I'd chosen truth over comfort, and it felt like freedom.